One summer night, my friends and I decided to visit the newly reopened amusement park on the edge of town. The park had been closed for years due to unexplained accidents, but recent renovations had brought it back to life. Eager for thrills, we bought our tickets and entered the park. As the night wore on, we heard whispers about Ride 13, an old roller coaster known for its terrifying drops and sharp turns. Rumor had it the ride was haunted, the site of the park's most tragic accident. Intrigued, we decided to find it. Ride 13 was at the far end of the park, hidden behind newer attractions. The entrance was overgrown with ivy, and a faded sign warned of its dangers. My friends and I exchanged nervous glances but decided to give it a try. The queue was empty, and as we climbed into the old cars, I felt a sense of dread. The safety bar clicked into place and the ride jerked forward. We ascended the first hill, the park's lights growing smaller behind us. As we reached the peak, I felt a cold breeze. The first drop was a steep plummet into darkness, and I screamed as the car hurtled down the track. The ride twisted and turned, the old wood creaking. My friends' screams echoed in the night, but something felt off. The air grew colder with each passing second. Halfway through the ride, we entered a tunnel. The darkness enveloped us, and the temperature dropped sharply. The screams of my friends faded, replaced by silence. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper.
"Help us."
The car emerged from the tunnel, and I gasped. The track ahead was broken, the wood splintered. The car screeched to a halt, teetering on the edge. My heart pounded as I looked around, but my friends were gone. I was alone. Panic set in. I struggled with the safety bar, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, voices pleading for help. Just as I thought the car would tip over, a figure appeared on the track ahead. It was a girl, no older than 10, with long, dark hair and a white dress. Her eyes were hollow, and she reached out towards me. "Help us," she repeated. The car lurched forward, and I screamed as it plummeted off the broken track. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact, but instead I felt a strange sensation of weightlessness. When I opened my eyes, I was back at the start of the ride, the safety bar lifting on its own. Dazed and disoriented, I stumbled out of the car. My friends were waiting for me, their faces pale with fear. "Where were you?" one of them asked. "We thought you disappeared." I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. I glanced back at Ride 13. The whispers faded. I knew I wasn't imagining it. We left the park in a hurry, the joy of the evening overshadowed by the haunting experience. I never went back to that amusement park, and Ride 13 remains a mystery. The amusement park had to close again due to mysterious disappearances. It had been years since Crescent Bay Amusement Park closed down, and rumors about its eerie state had been circulating for just as long. I'd heard tales of strange occurrences and unexplained sightings, but curiosity got the best of me. When my friends and I decided to explore the abandoned park one evening, we were driven by a mix of nostalgia and thrill. The park, now shrouded in decay, looked even more ominous in the fading light. We entered through a broken fence, our flashlights cutting through the growing darkness. The once vibrant colors of the rides had faded, and weeds had overtaken the walkways. The silence was thick, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of wind. Our first destination was the old roller coaster, the park's crowning attraction before its closure. It loomed in the distance, a skeletal structure of rusting steel and rotting wood. As we approached, its twisted frame seemed to groan under its own weight, as if the ride itself was weary of time. "Let's check it out," Jake said, his voice echoing with both excitement and apprehension. We climbed over the fence surrounding the coaster. The structure was surprisingly intact, though clearly neglected. We made our way to the base and began to ascend the stairs, each step creaking under our weight. The darkness grew thicker the higher we climbed, and the air became colder. At the top, we found ourselves overlooking the park. The view was both breathtaking and unsettling. The once bustling grounds were now an expanse of broken attractions and darkened spaces. We could barely make out the shapes of the Ferris wheel and other rides in the distance. "Look at that," Emily whispered, pointing at something in the distance. A flicker of light caught our attention. A single, dimly glowing light bulb hanging from the old funhouse. We weren't sure if it was a trick of the light or something more sinister. Intrigued, we decided to investigate after exploring the coaster. The coaster cars, though dusty and rusted, were still in place. We climbed into one and Jake, always the thrill seeker, suggested we try to move it. He grabbed the controls, which were surprisingly functional, and started to roll the car along the track. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the empty park. As we moved along the track, a sudden jolt caused the car to jerk violently. We looked around, and Emily's flashlight revealed that the tracks ahead were broken and twisted. We were stuck halfway up the first incline. "What was that?" Jake asked, his voice tight. Before we could respond, we heard a low, mechanical whirring. It seemed to come from the very tracks we were stuck on. The sound grew louder, and the coaster car began to shake. Panic set in as we realized that something was moving the car against our will. "Get out! We need to get out now!" I shouted. We scrambled out of the car, our hearts racing. As we descended the stairs, the whirring sound continued, now accompanied by clanging metal noises. We ran toward the funhouse, the flickering light bulb casting eerie shadows on the ground. When we reached the funhouse, the door creaked open as if welcoming us. Inside, the place was full of broken mirrors, dusty floors, and decaying decorations. We shone our flashlights around, revealing grotesque distortions in the mirrors that made our reflections look almost monstrous. We split up to explore. Emily and Jake went toward the back rooms while I stayed near the entrance, keeping a lookout. As I moved around the dimly lit entrance, I noticed something strange. A series of scratches on the walls, like claw marks. Suddenly, the light bulb in the entrance flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, but when I turned it on, the beam revealed a horrifying sight. A figure stood at the end of the hallway. Its form was vague but menacing, with unnatural eyes peering through the darkness. "Emily, Jake!" I called out, my voice trembling. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and the air seemed to grow colder. Emily and Jake came running back, their faces pale with fear when they saw the figure. We regrouped and ran. We tried to find our way out, but the funhouse seemed to shift around us. The hallways twisted, and the mirrors distorted our reflections, which only made it harder to navigate. We finally found a door leading outside, but it was locked. The figure was close. We could hear its footsteps in the distance, and what sounded like a growl. We pounded on the door, shouting for help, but our voices were swallowed by the oppressive silence. In a last-ditch effort, Jake grabbed a nearby metal pipe and used it to break the lock. The door swung open, and we burst outside into the night air, gasping for breath. We didn't stop to look back. We ran through the park and climbed over the fence, our hearts pounding with adrenaline. As we ran, I could hear whatever was back there let out a loud growl. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I feared for our lives and encouraged us to keep running as long as we could. After what felt like an eternity, we stopped. We could no longer hear any growls or footsteps. We walked the rest of the way back to my apartment and never spoke to anyone about what we had experienced. Fearing for our lives, we never returned again. I've always been a thrill seeker, and urban exploration was my latest obsession. The idea of discovering forgotten places and hidden stories was exhilarating. So when I heard about the old amusement park, the Unseen Carnival, I knew I had to check it out. The Unseen Carnival had a short-lived glory in the 1960s before a series of mysterious accidents forced it to close. It was said to be cursed, and locals avoided the area, letting it fall into decay. Perfect for someone like me. I arrived just before dusk, the perfect time to catch the eerie twilight glow over the abandoned park. The entrance was overgrown with weeds, the once vibrant sign now faded and barely legible. I squeezed through a gap in the rusted gate and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rust. I wandered through the silent park, past crumbling rides and broken attractions. The Ferris wheel loomed overhead, its seats swaying slightly in the breeze. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. As I explored, I felt a strange sense of being watched. I chalked it up to my imagination and continued on. I found an old map near what used to be the ticket booth and traced my finger along the faded lines. One spot caught my eye, the Hall of Mirrors. I decided to head there next. The Hall of Mirrors was one of the few structures still mostly intact. The entrance was dark, the door hanging off its hinges. I stepped inside, my flashlight casting long shadows in the dim interior. The mirrors were dirty and most of them were cracked, reflecting distorted images of myself. As I navigated the maze, I noticed something odd. The reflections weren't quite right. They seemed delayed, as if the mirrors were playing a game of their own. I laughed nervously and pressed on as I thought it was just my imagination. I turned a corner and came face to face with my figure in the mirror. My heart skipped a beat, but it was just my reflection, or so I thought. I moved, but the figure remained still, staring at me with empty eyes. Panic surged through me and I turned to run. I ran out of the Hall of Mirrors, my breath coming in short gasps. I needed to leave, but managed to calm myself down. Curiosity pulled me toward the old carousel. It stood in the center of the park, its once bright colors now muted and faded. The horses were frozen in mid-gallop. As I approached, the carousel began to turn on its own. A haunting off-key melody filled the air, and the horses moved up and down in a slow, eerie rhythm. I felt a chill run down my spine but couldn't look away. Suddenly I heard laughter, childlike and echoing. I spun around but no one was there. The laughter grew louder, mingling with the carousel's twisted tune. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, darting between the rides. I backed away, but the shadows followed. They grew more distinct, taking on human forms. Children, adults, all with empty eyes and ghostly smiles. They surrounded me, their laughter turning to whispers. "Stay with us," they murmured. I stumbled, falling to my knees. The shadows closed in, their whispers becoming more insistent. I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder, and I screamed, scrambling to my feet and running toward the gate. The shadows pursued me, their whispers filling my head. I reached the gate, squeezed through the gap, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking, and sped away from the cursed park. I haven't told anyone about my experience until now,